So basically what we have here is we have the Titanic data set set up. I've used R, but R just in a very basic way to bring in the passenger data. So I activate, as before, this R command, and what that does, it says, look, you have a Colab, it's a Python notebook, but I want to run a little bit of R code in there, and we can do that. And then I install the packages, the package for the titanic3 data set. And I've left, if I double click here, right, what I have is a little text box, and I've put a note in, you see? So it's kind of documenting what's going on. And just to show you a little bit how you put a note in, you have a choice. When you come up to the previous cell, then the next cell on, you have a choice. Do I put in code? Do I put in text? So if you put in, for instance, you might notice here, at the first text box I have here is say, activate the magic R command, right? If I put in another text box and I put in a £, so double click on that, and then put in, you see this hashtag or £, right? And then just write in introduction to pandas, right, for Titanic. That will leave then just adjacent, that's there, you see? So I can toggle through, I can inspect what's going on in my notebook by just coming down here and hitting inspect data. I then get that element of the project, of the workbook, of the notebook that relates to inspecting the data, what's in the data. Okay, so that's a nice clean way of navigating through. We've now installed, or we've installed the passenger library. I want to just see what's in there, so I hit struct. Now this is not, str is part of base R, not part of tidyverse. So I can just run that and I get, again, a summary of what's in the data set, right? I can write it out. Again, in this note, I don't have, if I inspect here what's in, again, if we wanted to figure out, well, where is the data being stored? We're told in the content folder, but when I come in here to the content folder and look for the data, there is no data related to, I've sample data, but it's nothing to do with the Titanic. So if I want to write out the Titanic3 dataset, I'll use this R command, write.csv, name of the file, and then we'll call it Titanic3 CSV. When I check here again, it may not appear for a second. Now it's here. So now we have that Titanic3 data. It's available. I know it's in the content folder. There's a few tutorials. So what I've done here, this is just basically tutorial, and I've left the guide here to a link to the original Pandas libraries, some description of the documentation and tutorials. And then there's a cheat sheet. So for instance, it just gives a complete overview of what type of data manipulation you can do using this Panda Python library, right? So that's just, sometimes it's important that you leave behind maybe a trail like Hansel and Gretel, right? Where did we start from? What are we using? And so on. I want to import in important libraries like pandas to do the data transformation, numpy for multi-dimensional array mathematical operations. Seaborn is used for graphing, visualization, and matplotlib for graphing and visualization. So they're introduced now into the notebook, and we're using Python here on in. And I want to read in the data. So the data is not available for Python for the pandas to perform the data transformation. So I've got to read in the data into the Python notebook. I've done that. I want to then view the data. I'm getting this thing arising again. There's a new column that's introduced. It's not in the native titanic3 dataset. We need to get rid of that. And the way we drop that, we can use this pandas command, titanic3 drop execute. That's now gone. We can check to see is it gone. And you can see we no longer, by using this titanic3, that's the name of the dataset, we're dropping the columns that are called what? In the heading here, it somehow came in as unnamed :0. That's now gone and we've dropped it, okay? So we want to see what's in our data set. A handy way, and we'll do this for other data sets as well that we're going to introduce, but we set up a loop and it says run through each of the columns. And in each column, tell us how many of a particular instance do we observe. So for instance, if we come down to survived, let's say, we should only get, let's see if we can find it. We should just get a 0, 1. The number of zeros and ones would appear, right? So for instance, siblings, there was 891 passengers who had no siblings or spouses. There was 319 that had 1. There was 42 that had 2. There was 6 that had 5. And for instance, then for the parents or children, there was 1,002 who had no parents, no children. So there are passengers that had no parents, no children. There was 1 that had, there was 170 that had 1, and so on. So that is just revealed in this 3 lines of code. You're able to get this type of information out. For instance, there was 277 passengers in second class. There's 323 in first class. There's 709 in third class. There was 809 people who drowned. There was 500 who survived. The data type was an integer, so it's a number. It's an integer, right? And we can track that. So those 3 lines of code is a very nice way of getting this kind of summary output. You may not go through everything, and it may be, in some cases, there's just too much. So you may not pay too much attention to it, but it's a nice way of getting that information revealed. You might say, overall, what does this look like? Okay, we've titanic3.shape, so we've 1,309 rows and 14 columns. And we have, to look at the first 10 passengers in the data set, titanic3 head.10, we could put in 20. I think I put 20 below. But if we want to look at the first 20 passengers, for instance, if you want to eyeball them up close, because sometimes you do need to see what's in your data set to get a feel of what's the spread of the variables and so on, we can do that. If you put 50, you probably won't get everything, all 50, right? It might give you a summary. Okay, so it didn't, well, it does, it gives us all 50. Right, so that's a nice way to inspect your data also. Now you can also come over here, of course, and look at the native CSV file. But if let's say you had 20,000 rows in your data set, it may not make that available here in the Google Colab. Okay. Inspect the data types. If it's just a simple, I want to see what is this P class? It's an object. You might say, do I need to convert that to a number or a factor? It makes sense that age is a number. It makes sense that the ticket is maybe an object, so on. So you might be happy with what you have there, or maybe something when you look at this data, you might say maybe we might have to change the designation here in terms of what it is. Is it a number or is it a factor, right? So we say survived is 1, 0. Is that actually a number, or should we consider it as some kind of factor or classification? That's something we might have to deal with, okay? And then we might say, instead of using titanic3, could we just call this data set df and call it data frame, right? So it's just an innocent kind of, we probably would do better if we, from here on in, could just say, look, the data is the titanic3. Could we give it a simpler name? okay, let's say df for data frame. And then we would like to inspect just get some information in terms of extra information in terms of what's in there. And we're using this pandas syntax, and it throws out the data type. But it's also revealing also, are we missing values? So for age, right, there's 146 non-nulls, but there are some missing variables, right? And we need to be conscious of that when we're setting up our analysis. What data are we missing, right? So some of these passengers didn't reveal their age, right? If we go to the age heading here, we've age for a lot of them, right? But there's one, no age, right? Now, why did Mr. John D. Bowman not present his age? Maybe he forgot. Maybe it's just an oversight, but there's quite a few of those, especially in third class. And given the period 1912, some people may not have had that recorded, a precise date of birth, right? Okay, so we might also be looking for count the unique numbers in each column, right? So with the survived, there's just two, the zeros and the ones, right? In P class, there's three. There's first class, second class, third class. For sex, there's two outcomes. For age, there's 98 different ages. For siblings and spouses, there were 7 different numbers. Again, this is revealing how many unique observations that are there, and we're using the Panda syntax. We might like to describe what's in our data set. We might like to sort it. We might like to see, look, I would like to see who paid the highest and the lowest fare, and we'll sort from looking at the lowest value and then going to the highest value, right? So we go from, we see here somebody in second class, but we don't have a fare. It's recorded as 0. So it looks like some people came aboard, didn't pay anything. And then the more expensive tickets, skipping through, toggling through, we have the most expensive tickets here at 512, right? And then if we want to do it in ascending order, we just put in, set the ascending argument to, so we go to descending, right? So the most expensive tickets, right? And then go backwards, present our data. So we're identifying each column passenger and ordering them, not in terms of sex or passenger class, but in terms of how much they spent on their ticket. And there was 4 passengers who paid 512. And then the next expensive ticket was 263, and so on. And of course, you could put in maybe the top 50 there and run, and we get the top ranked by fare, the top 50, right? So actually, there wasn't, of the 1,309, the top fares, there wasn't a huge number who were paying over 200 euros. Sorry, 200 pounds, right? There wasn't a huge number. So less than 50 paid over 200 pounds. But there was a few who paid really these exceptional amounts, right? Okay, so that's also very interesting. We could, again, this is part of your data analysis, and you're trying to organize your data systematically. And we want to do it, you know, we're here at sorting the columns, and we can see where we are in terms of our navigation, right? So maybe the cabin, right? If the cabin represents some kind of a number or something, maybe we can set that out, maybe alphabetically or something. And at the end, we have the NAs. So the NA position is equal to last. So if we have NAs, if we have cells that don't have a designation, we're putting them at the end, right? Again, it's another little nuance, little layer, that these are things that maybe you don't have immediately at your fingertips in Excel, but you do get in terms of the pandas. And then you want to do a little bit of graphing, visualization, and you have that also then in the pandas. Okay, so that bit is just a little bit the ordering, the sorting, the unique values, creating. Now I'll do more analysis here, and we'll do that the next day. And I'll leave some video clips up as well that take us through some of the syntax for pandas. And we'll do pivot tables, correlation matrices, and so on. Some of the ways we might filter the data, estimate medians, select columns, filter rows, and so on. And that bit, I might just pause there on that